Well, what a great introduction to what I have to share. I can't believe how on the same wavelength you and I are with our presentations. It's just, it's really quite remarkable, as you'll see. So for those who don't know me, I'm a regular contributor here. I consider the assignment that comes from each week to be a real opportunity to jump into research and explore the astrological dimension. It's been very, very fruitful, and it's been a real quickening to my spirit to be involved with those of you who have been here week after week, certainly, and those who are here now for the first time. I'm in the humanistic astrology tradition, which I believe Redlina would confirm for herself as well. And we're really drawing on the tradition pioneered by Dwayne Rourke. And the thing about working with Rudyard is that he not only addressed astrology, but he was also a philosopher. So you have a vast repository of philosophical wisdom that comes along with any study of his works. And so my presentation will include both the astrological dimension and the philosophical. So here we go. So I'm picking up on last week's presentation and taking Redlina's guidance. Always great to get your concise expression of what our topic is for the upcoming week, Redlina. It's a great kind of a research vector. So we're exploring the current Saturn-Uranus cycle from a humanistic transpersonal point of view. A quote from Rudyard from his book, From Humanistic to Transpersonal Astrology in 1975. The highest purpose of astrology is to provide the individual human being with a knowledge of how best to act so that the closed center of the ego may open up to the power of his or her inherent destiny or dharma. So that's a very concise statement coming from Rudyard and his years and years. He wrote about astrology for over 50 years. And this is one of his very most concise statements about what he considers to be the purpose of astrology. Having been studying him since 1972, I experienced his growth curve through his works, seeing him pioneering this humanistic approach to astrology, and then seeing and experiencing his transition into what he called the transpersonal domain, that's signified by the outer planets. So working, with his work, it was like being carried aloft by a skyhook, as I studied his works. And very evocative of the more transcendent realms. He was very capable of bringing that about. Now, Alexander Ruperti was I think of similar age to Rudyard, became a student of Rudyard, and in his book Cycles of Becoming, we get this statement by him of what Saturn actually represents from a humanistic astrology point of view. The ego is the Saturnian structure of man's consciousness. It is the expression of one's capacity for consistency in behavior, and it is the foundation of one's conscious sense of I. Uranus, on the other hand, represents essentially the power enabling man to ascend from one level of consciousness to the next. That is, to experience a true metamorphosis. And that quote is from Rudyard. So we get a sense then of the importance being placed on this journey of transcendence, of transcending limiting beliefs and opening up to a broader and broader sense of who we are. Now, I can't get into Saturn and Uranus without acknowledging the presence of Chiron, which sits between the two and whose orbit, and in fact, shuttles between the two planetary orbits. So in my orientation to astrology, Chiron is the great exemplar of astrology at its very highest. And I see Rudyard as being a true embodiment of the Chiron archetype. So astrological Chiron is named after the mythological Greek god Chiron, a highly revered centaur who was at once a great astrologer and teacher who taught shamanism, astrology, healing, sacred warrior ways, and divination. This latter skill, divination, is of particular relevance to our narrative. As Barbara Clow says, and Barbara wrote the book on Chiron as far as I'm concerned, divination is a skill to be used to read the archetypal realms, emotional, mental, or soul consciousness that is not physical, but is real. And these realms are accessible by feelings, ideas, and visions. So I personally see all of the astrological tools that we have at our disposal to be, in fact, divination tools. We are, as astrologers, diviners of harmony. And the fundamental divination tool, as far as I'm concerned, and I believe as far as Rudyard is concerned, is the lunation cycle. And I'm so glad that you brought that forward, Redlin, because it really, if people truly understand the value of this particular tool, they'll be very gratified in using it. It is the foundation of Rudyard's whole process-oriented approach to astrology. I call it a key to an astrological key to all worlds, and I've applied it in many different ways, which over time I've been able to share. So just to get a graphic overview of the areas we're talking about. This is an old image from, I'm not sure when, but it's called the Flammarion. And in the Flammarion, we have as I see it, the domain of sun sign astrology to the right, right over to the left side where that bubble kind of ends, and we look beyond, as the fellow in the bottom left-hand corner is doing. And as Barbara Clow says, the lesson of, and that would be Chiron, or the Chiron factor. The lesson of Chiron is to break Saturn form so that the native can move into Uranian dimensions. And within those Uranian dimensions, we see the lunation cycle as a key, a fractal key. What that means is that it can be applied to understanding any cycle of relationship at whatever scale, because a fractal does not change its structure with changes in scale. So we can be tracking the unfoldment of a cycle between Saturn and Uranus, or between Pluto and the Sun, or between Mars and Venus. All of these relationships are tracked according to the same archetypal structure. And the tool of Chiron, the tools of Chiron are there to help us navigate that territory. So taking the lunation cycle divination tool and applying it to the Saturn-Uranus cycle, my little narrative begins with my own first connection, conscious connection to the Saturn-Uranus cycle that we're in now. And that was on October 18th, 1988, when at the culmination of 3 exact conjunctions of Saturn and Uranus, which occurred at Sagittarius 2749, which is also known as galactic center. In honor of the occasion, an astrological conference called Galactica 88 was held at the world famous Banff Springs Hotel, October 13th to 16th. I attended that conference and came away from it feeling completely attuned to the Saturn-Uranus cycle, a feeling that persists to this day. Now, I think that was a very auspicious moment for me to have taken in that conference. If I hadn't done so, I'm sure I wouldn't have the same relationship to the Saturn-Uranus cycle that I have. It really was an initiation into direct experience of a cosmic cycle. I was there with the many other astrologers that gathered for that conference. We were completely aware that we were entering a new cycle, a new 45-year cycle. And it was a really remarkable time. So there we have the current cycle from 1988 to 2032, the lunation cycle archetype, the new moon point, 1988, then to first quarter square in 1999, full moon 2008. And where are we now within this cycle? As Redlina has already indicated, we're at the last quarter square. And isn't it a lot like that? We're in a crisis, a global crisis in consciousness, according to this view, at which time there is appropriate action. That's the guidance of the lunation cycle archetype, is that different stages require different action. And the guidance for what action is appropriate is contained within the circle of phases that we have here. So as we collectively come into this crisis in consciousness moment, we're being called, as has already been indicated, it's a time of reassessment. It's a time to really check in, to look back to the full moon and the fulfillment that has preceded, and know that not all of that is to be carried forward. It's an entry into a time of essentialization, where we cast off that which is no longer serving us, according to the concentrated values that have come together in our consciousness. So this is a multi-year process, and we're just now in the thick of the change, the conscious change, the reorientation. And later will come the dark of the moon, as it's called, which is the time during which the seeds of the current cycle are formed. And those seeds will be what empowers the future cycle beginning in 2032. So, for example, to be born in that final stage of a Saturn-Uranus cycle, as Redlina is, the indication there is that this is a seed person in potentiality. This is a person who will concentrate in their own being the essential elements of a whole cycle of our relationship here. And there are many threads coming together in that seed, and that's what is really formulated in completion in that release portion, the dark moon portion of the cycle. And Rudyard goes very much in depth into the archetype of the seed man, the seed woman. So just basic sense of, the difference between the first quarter crisis and the last quarter crisis. In the first quarter of the lunation cycle, we're building up form. It's the moon phase reveals that, the phase is getting brighter and brighter and brighter as we come up to a full moon. And I'm just realizing this graphic actually is reversed. I think I started with a black and white version. But anyway, we go from new moon, the dark of the moon at the top, to the full moon. Challenge at the first quarter is from outside. We're pushing up against other forms and having to assert through building form what it is that's empowering that part of the cycle for us. And at that particular crisis, decisive action is required. And that decisive action is like taking hold of the steering wheel and steering ourselves towards some kind of, by then, dimly recognized fulfillment, which is what the progressed or the full moon period in the cycle represents. So the indication is that we actually have to act in order to get to that place. If we don't act, we just get carried along. The momentum of the cultural trends that surround us and impinge on our lives will carry us hither and yon. What this model is emphasizing is that if you're intending to be an individual and have the life that you envision, you've got to be able to act on your own behalf and through the creation of form. Now, for any particular cycle, that creation process culminates at the full moon point. Now, from full moon on, we're in a whole different ballgame. Now it's about releasing meaning from the forms that have been created. If you're an author, for example, you've been writing a book in the first half of the cycle, and it comes to fulfillment at full moon, then it's all about that people are actually engaged with the ideas. And there's, as we see, keywords are fulfillment. So we have the fullness of the form, and then we go into distribution and into demonstration. And those ideas, those concepts have to be brought to bear in a real life situation and have their value shown. And of course, as is the case with everything, as the process moves on, there is the inevitable decay. And as Rudyard points out, the decay can be very glorious. The radiant leaves of autumn are very appealing. But if your dharma, if your truth of being is to be more of the seed, then you are having in that time to cast off all non-essentials, all forms that no longer serve, and get right down to that very, very core essence. Saturn-Uranus cycles throughout history. Another quote from Rudyard, and this is from his book, Astrological Timing. What algebra is to the immense mass of the experimental data of physics or astronomy, astrology can be to the profusion of historical data collected by historians and archaeologists. It can help us to orient ourselves to the future by giving a new meaning to the present trends. So looking back, we're going here now to the Saturn-Uranus cycle from 1897 to 1942. Just kind of an overview, and what we're possibly able to do is to learn from the past and to see if there's a resonance between previous cycles of Saturn and Uranus and our current cycle. That would ultimately be of value, I think. So when we go way back to 1897, there was the new moon point of the cycle. It was at Scorpio 28 degrees. We had the U.S. Declaring war on Spain, and there was a battle in Cuba. I think that kind of kicked things off. And as I have learned, having been adopted at birth, it wasn't until I was 40 that I became related to my birth mother. And I learned that my grandfather actually fought in that war as a U.S. Army cavalry officer, a sergeant in the cavalry. And it's been very fascinating this last week just to kind of tune back into that era and think about him being a part of that whole action. The British Empire was expanding into South Africa. So we had colonialism kind of on the rise. That's way back when, the early 1900s. We've got the airplane is something new and novel. The Model T Ford is new. We're just getting rolling as a car culture. And then as we go up to 1918, 1920, we have World War I coming on. The Russian Revolution, 1917. And then when we get to what corresponds to the last quarter square, we're looking at 1930, 1931, and the start of the Great Depression, which lasted right into the early 40s. Now, this should interest us because this is exactly the stage of the cycle that we're entering now, and kind of an almost ominous resonance, perhaps, with that particular time. However, it's not the only resonance that's available. As we come into the most recent Saturn-Uranus cycle, beginning with the World War II, and then we had the atom bomb, 1945. At first quarter square, we've got television coming on. We've got the transistor. I owned a little radio like that, transistor radio shown in the hand there. In fact, I won it in an art contest. We have credit cards coming on for the first time. All of this we take so for granted now, but these were novel inventions. These were in their time, very disruptive technologies to the status quo. When we get up to the full moon portion of the cycle, we've got Chairman Mao on the rise. We've got the Summer of Love in California. We've got the Black Panthers. We've got kids with video games coming on. We've got the personal calculator. I'm sure everybody can remember having the first calculator in their hands. And then by the progressed last quarter, which resonates with where we are now, we have the personal computer coming on stream. Now, talk about a disruptive technology, to the status quo. This really empowered so many, and not only businesses, but individuals. This is landing in the individual lap. Now, as we get towards the end of the cycle, and we have something that I'm very intrigued by, and which continues to be a celestial phenomenon, and that is supernova 1987A. Now, as an astrologer who has lived by the motto, as above, so below, when I look back to what was happening in my life in 1987, and I see that particular image of the supernova that occurred at the time, there's a resonance between what was happening in the skies and what was happening in my life. And I've yet to really explore in depth that resonance, but it's on my bucket list. For some of you, you will remember that in 87 was the harmonic convergence. That was just prior to, that was a worldwide peaceful grassroots healing event that was timed according to the Mayan sacred calendar. And Jose Arguelles was the creator of that event. We have at that time the USSR falling, and we have, for our great benefit, the internet coming alive. So these are our trends, historical trends, and it's only just a snippet of an overview. But all of these represent threads that we're now being called to well, these are the threads, let's say, that are comprised in the seed that was formed in 1988. There's the broad sweep. In my own chart, this I have Pallas Athena at Taurus 30 degrees, the peacock parading on the terrace of an old castle. And that is the keynote for that Saturn-Uranus cycle from 1942 to 1988. So that has been a special interest to me. Excuse me. So now coming to the current cycle and just doing a bit of an overview. What comes to my mind is that there are two themes that become very prominent here. On the one hand, you have control, Saturn. On the other, you have freedom, Uranus. And when you start to look out at the events of today, I think if you spend the time contemplating, you'll find that those two themes are very much in play on the world stage right now. And there, we of course are having a part to play. Now, what we're maybe attempting to do through our astrological practices is to divine what is a harmonious way of navigating through this time. And that's where we're at. It's time. And what can we learn from this cycle so far that can help us in that? Well, one of the things that I find really interesting is that right at the progressed or the full moon portion of the cycle, if you look at in 2008, released to the world was a revolutionary idea. And that was the idea of a cryptocurrency that circumvented the need to have a third party involved in the transactional exchanges of commerce. In other words, an invention came forth that basically does without banks and puts in the hands of the people a very powerful new technology. Now, that was an idea back in 1988 when Tim May, we see in the bottom left-hand corner, wrote a very short manifesto called the Crypto Anarchist Manifesto. And he envisioned this notion of a currency revolution. And from 1988 until 2008, a small group, relatively small group of inventors, cypherpunks as they were called, collaborated in very small gatherings, similar to what we're experiencing right here with you, Radlina, in those small gatherings, out of that came this, what's called the Satoshi White Paper. So that in 2008, the paper was released. In January of 2009, the first Bitcoin, which is an entirely digital phenomenon, was created. And that was the first of what will eventually be 21 million Bitcoin, as they're called. Now, that is an invention that since 2008 until today, in 2021, has grown from a simple idea to a financial phenomenon that has $1 trillion attached to it. So the total market cap now of Bitcoin in the world economy is $1 trillion. So it's become a very real force, and it's in the hands of the people. I got into Bitcoin through astrology because of making that connection, realizing that the full moon point of the cycle corresponded to the release of Bitcoin. On my website, if you're interested to read about all the research I did for the emergence of Bitcoin in relation to the cycle, it's there. And as I have on the website, I'm indicating nothing is more powerful than an idea whose time has come. And I really believe that Bitcoin is an invention that is going to transform society big time. Now, in further fleshing out of my attunement to the Saturn-Uranus cycle, I've anticipated this waning square for where it first really came up in my consciousness was 2017. And since that time, I've been following the prompts, the clues that come, the synchronicities, and it's to the point now where I'm anticipating having some kind of collective engagement on these 3 days, which are the 3 days of the exact, the perfection of the square. So February 17th, June 14th, and December 23rd. So at this point, I mean, my imaginings have flamed up, and I've seen, this worldwide convergence like there was in harmonic convergence and so on. Well, I've scaled back considerably to, especially since being involved with these weekly groups, to where now I'm thinking, well, it could just be a gathering as we do on those particular dates, and take it from there. But I'm open to whatever. I have this openness of my spirit to whatever Uranus would have me tend to. So I keep pulling on threads, and I really take this to heart. Begin to weave, and the divine will provide the thread. Well, that's exactly what I've done. Is I've begun to weave, and little by little, something is taking form. For one thing, I've been researching Aquarians. Who do I know or have heard of that is an Aquarian and who has some relation, especially who has some relationship to crypto? And we see here there's 3: Vitalik Buterin, inventor of Ethereum; Roger Ver, a Bitcoin Cash; Max Kaiser is a Bitcoin proponent. Now these other people are Aquarians who, for whatever reason, I have noted here, and will be exploring their lives in relationship to this square. In particular, I'm interested. I just this week discovered Michael Saylor. Michael Saylor, born February 4th, 1965, is an American entrepreneur and business executive who co-founded and leads MicroStrategy, a company which provides business intelligence, mobile software, and cloud-based services. Saylor authored the 2012 book, The Mobile Wave: how mobile intelligence will change everything. He is also the sole trustee of Saylor Academy, a provider of free online education. As of 2016, Saylor has been granted 31 patents and has 9 additional applications under review. So very interesting to me, this fellow is, because for those of you who are aware of the evolutionary astrology of Jeff Green's teachings around Pluto especially, there's what is called your Pluto point, which is that point exactly opposite your Pluto at birth. And Mr. Saylor's sun sits exactly on my Pluto point. So I'm obviously to learn something from this fellow, and it's very auspicious that I've discovered him at this time. Very much an exemplar of what it is to be a Bitcoin maximalist. His company, and as through his other entities, has purchased $2.5 billion worth of Bitcoin. So on the world stage, he is a giant, and he is inspiring other companies who are really looking at their financial standings in the world. He is inspiring them to put their resources into Bitcoin. And he has all kinds of good reasons for why. The fellow is, in fact, a rocket scientist. And a rocket scientist who's at the helm of a strategic business organization. An exemplar, as far as I can see, of the Aquarian spirit. His Saylor's Academy, this is the mission statement. Saylor Academy is a nonprofit initiative working since 2008 to offer free and open online courses to all who want to learn. We offer nearly 100 full-length courses at the college and professional levels, each built by subject matter experts. All courses are available to complete at your pace, on your schedule, and free of cost. Wow. Now, how revolutionary is that? I would say that's an Aquarian ideal coming into manifestation. Upcoming February 3rd and 4th, Mr. Saylor is born on February 4th. I'm born on February 3rd. I found this little synchronicity to be quite riveting. His organization is organizing a conference called World.now. And again, a free conference. I don't know if I'll be taking it in or not, but it's certainly there in the field, and a very substantial contribution to world culture. I've got some final words from Rudyard. Man, as the individual, is one in its most complete, most integrating focalization, because in the individual, the wholeness of existence can be integrated and focused in work. This work is an activity that encompasses both the realm of spirit and the realm of matter. Through this activity, compassion takes form. And that's from Rudyard's book, Culture, Crisis, and Creativity. And on that note, I end the presentation.